8 times, broke his back, 3 times, and still. Was the day he sat across from Adolf Hitler, looked him in the eyes, and asked the question. No one in Germany dared to ask. What happened next? Changed everything. Changed everything. Welcome to Warplane Mysteries, the channel where history's greatest air battles. Then this channel was built for you. Hit that subscribe button. Think of it like saving a seat at the most important history class. And one more thing before we begin. Drop a comment below right now and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Whether you are sitting in London, Lagos, Lahore, Los Angeles, because this story belongs to all of you. In 1918, the guns of World War I finally fell silent. But the peace that followed, it crushed an entire nation beneath its weight. Germany was stripped of its territory. Its army was reduced to almost nothing. Its navy was dismantled, was completely forbidden. But the cruelest blow of all was financial. The German mark became worthless almost overnight. Personal savings vanished. 7 million Germans lost their jobs, and families that had worked for generations suddenly found themselves with nothing. When people are hungry, when people are humiliated, when people have lost everything they built, they stop asking questions. They start looking for answers. And in 1933, Adolf Hitler gave them answers. He promised work, and he delivered, at least on the surface, within 2 years. Unemployment had fallen dramatically. Roads were being built. Factories were running again. People were eating. What they could not see? Psychologically impossible. This was the world into which Günther Rall was born. Disciplined, athletic. He received a classical education. Rall was just 14 years old. He did not join the Nazi Party. His family did not join the Nazi Party. But like millions of ordinary Germans, they lived inside a system that had been carefully constructed to make obedience feel like loyalty, and loyalty feel like survival. Rall became a soldier, not out of fanaticism. And to earn his place, that desire would take him to the skies. And eventually, inside a system that is fundamentally wrong, Günther Rall was not a monster. He was not even a devoted follower of the ideology that surrounded him. He was something far more complicated. He was exceptionally good at a job that served a cause any human being can occupy, flew directly into its heart. What greeted him on the Eastern Front was not glory, poor food, and bombed airfields at night. His mechanics worked on aircraft engines with bare hands, in temperatures that froze metal. His pilots flew 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 missions, every single day. 100 confirmed kills, a number so extraordinary that it earned him a direct invitation to Hitler's mountain retreat. And it was here, in this moment of supposed triumph, that something remarkable happened, something that most men. Hitler sat among his officers, speaking with absolute certainty, painting visions of German colonies in Ukraine, of irrigated farms, of a conquered East. The other officers sat in silence, nodding, agreeing. How long is this war in Russia going to last? The room went cold. Hitler stopped. He looked at Rall, and for the first time, a man surrounded by yes, surrounded by fear. This is not simply a moment of personal courage. This is a case study in what happens when an entire system runs out of honest voices. Germany did not collapse only because of bombs or because of oil shortages. The moment it silenced every voice that dared to say, "This is not working." But Rall's story does not end with courage alone. Because even after that moment, even after looking Hitler in the eyes, even after knowing, in his bones, that the war was already lost, he climbed back into his cockpit. After the catastrophic German defeat at Kursk, the largest tank battle in human history, Rall sat with his wife Herta Mack spoke words that carried the full weight of a man who had seen too much. "Hertie, the war is lost." He did not say it in panic. When truth has finally overtaken hope. And still, shot down 8 times. Broken back 3 times. Not because he believed in the system, but because he believed. But business never escapes competence without the courage to challenge. It only makes the collapse more expensive. That does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fanfare. It does not demand recognition. It simply builds, quietly, systematically. Until one morning, the enemy wakes up and realizes that the battlefield, it was a precision instrument of strategic destruction. He panned gold to pay for college. He had no burning desire to fly. Was something far more valuable. He had clarity, the ability to see a system, the aircraft that would become his weapon of choice. He was completely unimpressed. But Zemp did not see what it was. He saw what it could become. It could not turn as sharply as a Spitfire. It could not match the agility of the German Me-109. But it could do one thing. Better than anything else in the sky. It could dive, space that tore apart lesser aircraft, at angles that left German pilots simply unable to follow. And Zemp built his entire tactical philosophy around that single, brutal advantage, while every other commander was fighting the war at 10 to 15,000 feet. In slow-turning engagements, Zemp stacked his squadrons at 25,000 feet, watching, waiting, and then coming down like a hammer from nearly every other commander in the European theater. Discipline is not the enemy of aggression. It is the architecture of it. He did not tolerate lone wolves. He did not reward undisciplined hotshots, no matter how talented they were, because he had studied what happened when discipline collapsed. To stay glued beside slow-moving bombers, ordering his fighters to fly close escort, stripping them of the very advantages that made them dangerous. Zemp refused to repeat that mistake, and so he innovated. He adopted the German finger for formation, for aircraft, arranged like the fingers of an outstretched hand. One element to attack, one element to defend. Fluid, adaptive, lethal. Then he took it further. He began sending his fighters ahead of the bombers, not beside them, not above them, but ahead of them, while they were still forming up, still climbing, still organizing. This directly violated 8th Air Force directives. Zemp risked court-martial. He risked losing his command. He risked everything he had built, but his results were impossible to argue with. By late 1943, just 7 months after its first combat mission, Zemp's 56th Fighter Group had produced 6 aces, including Zemp himself. Their kill ratio stood at 8-1. Was even close, and the Germans knew it. They felt it. Every time they tried to form up, every time they tried to reach the bombers. There was Zemp's Wolfpack, already there, already diving, already dismantling them. Then came May 12, 1944. The day Zemp unveiled his most ambitious tactical innovation. He called it the Zemp Fan. 3 8-plane squadrons, launched 20 minutes ahead of the bombers, spreading outward, in a 180-degree arc, sweeping the entire Frankfurt region. 4 German fighters, not waiting to be attacked. Hunting, systematically, methodically, mercilessly. The results were devastating. The 56th Fighter Group shot down 19 German fighters, losing only 3 of their own. Bomber loss rates, which had been running as high as 10 to 15% per mission, fell to just 4%. Now pause here and consider what Zemp actually did. He did not have more aircraft than his enemy. He did not have better technology. He did not have more experienced pilots. What he had was a system built on honest assessment, disciplined execution, and the courage to challenge orders that were tactically wrong. He studied his competitor. He identified the single critical advantage in his own resources. He built his entire strategy around that advantage, and he refused to let institutional pressure force him back into someone else's failed playbook. In business, this is called competitive asymmetry, finding the one thing you do better than anyone else in the market, and building your entire operation around that single, decisive strength. Zemk found his at 25,000 feet. The question every entrepreneur, every business leader, every decision maker watching this must now ask themselves is this: where is your 25,000 feet? There is a moment in the life of every failing system, every collapsing empire, every bankrupt business, when the people at the top finally understand not what went wrong, but when it went wrong, and that moment is almost always too late. Albert Speer. Hitler's own Minister of Armaments, one of the most intelligent and analytically gifted men in the entire Nazi government, sat down after the war and identified, with absolute precision, the exact date, the exact mission, the exact moment when Germany's defeat became not just likely, but mathematically inevitable. It was not Stalingrad. It was not Kursk. It was not the Allied invasion of Normandy. It was May 12, 1944, the day American bombers struck Germany's synthetic oil plants, and Speer wrote that it was the day Germany lost the technological war. To understand why, one must first understand what synthetic oil actually meant to the German war machine before World War II. Germany imported most of its petroleum. It had no significant oil fields of its own, no natural reserves, no domestic supply. What it had was coal, vast, seemingly endless reserves of coal, and German engineers had developed a process to convert that coal into synthetic oil, into aviation fuel, into the lifeblood of every tank, every aircraft, every submarine that Germany sent into battle. By 1943, synthetic oil plants were supplying half of all Germany's petroleum and all of its aviation fuel. Every single German fighter that rose to meet the Allied bombers ran on synthetic fuel. Every panzer tank that rolled across the Eastern Front ran on synthetic fuel. Every training flight that produced the next generation of Luftwaffe pilots ran on synthetic fuel. And the Germans had been extraordinarily clever about protecting this vulnerability. They had placed their synthetic oil manufacturing facilities deep inside Germany, far beyond the range of any American fighter escort, which meant that sending bombers there without fighter protection was essentially sending those crews to their deaths. And so, for months, the oil plants sat untouched, producing, supplying, sustaining the German war machine. But then, something changed. Drop tanks extended the range of the P-47. The new long-range P-51 Mustang came online, and suddenly, for the first time, American bombers could reach those plants with fighter escort, with protection, with a genuine chance of doing catastrophic, irreversible damage. On May 12, 1944, 800 American bombers, escorted by nearly 1,000 fighters, struck Germany's synthetic oil industry in a single coordinated raid. The results were not merely significant, they were surgical, systemic, and terminal. Within weeks of that first raid, bombing missions in May alone cut German fuel production in half. By July, every single synthetic oil plant in Germany had been hit. Production had been cut by 98%. Read that number again, 98%. From May 12th until the end of the war, German oil production averaged just 9% of its total capacity. Now consider what 9% actually means on the ground, in real operational terms. The Luftwaffe began cutting pilot training time. To the absolute bone, young men were being sent into combat with barely 100 total hours of flying experience. Not 100 hours in a fighter, 100 hours total against Allied pilots. With hundreds of hours of combat experience against veterans like Zemke, like Rankin, like the hardened professionals. Of the 56th Fighter Group, these young German pilots were not soldiers. They were, in Rall's own devastating words, candy taken from a baby. And it went further. Hitler's final great counter-offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. Launched with enormous ambition, with thousands of men, with tanks, artillery, and air support. Failed not because of Allied resistance alone, but because Hitler's panzers simply ran out of gas. 3 months later, 1,200 German tanks waited at the Vistula River, positioned to block the Soviet advance. Engines ready, crews in position, orders issued, and they did not move. Because there was no fuel. To move them, the Soviet army simply drove around them. This is not a story about bombing. This is not a story about aircraft, or tactics, or military strategy. This is a story about supply chain dependency, single point of failure, and the catastrophic compounding cost of ignoring critical infrastructure vulnerability. Germany built the most powerful, most disciplined, most technologically sophisticated military force the world had ever seen, and then built its entire operational capacity on a single resource that it could not protect, could not replace, and could not survive without. For every business leader watching this, for every entrepreneur, for every decision maker, building something they intend to last, the question is not, are you performing well today? The question is, what is your synthetic oil? What is the single resource, the single supplier, the single platform, the single revenue stream, that if disrupted, would cut your operational capacity by 98%? Germany had years of warning, years of intelligence reports, years of strategic advisors telling them that their oil dependency was an existential vulnerability. They chose not to listen. Albert Speer understood it, but understood it only when the bombs were already falling. Do not be Albert Speer. Do not be the brilliant man who identified the fatal flaw.